Fine.
Okay. Okay, great. Awesome. So for those who don't know me, I'm Elton. And yeah, I'm taking you for the graveyard shift this evening. We're going to be covering task D. But we also thought, seeing that this is the last math task in this workshop series, I thought, I'd take some time to maybe just talk about a general approach to math when it comes to the APC. Also just on the back of the fact that as much as, going through task D is important, you're not going to get a task exactly like task D again. But the important thing is to take the learnings from the task and see how we can apply it to, the tasks that may be coming in the upcoming Psycho APC. So I don't know if any of you guys had the chance to see this materials yet, but it will be available. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see this Word document? You guys might have the PDF version, but can you guys see this Word document? How's it, Rachel? Oh, is that her hand, or we just confirm you can see it?
Yes, we can see.
Yes, sir.
We can see Elton.
Okay, great. Cool. So as I said, I realized the graveyard shift and we are running a bit quite late. So I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this, but I thought, it's pointless just to share this and not explain, the thinking behind it. But yeah, so I'm going to run through it, and then also at least you have it available for, consulting afterwards. And then we'll get into task D. But hopefully by the time we go through this, hopefully the thinking around task D will be easier. All right. So, and I've listened to part of what Rendani was saying earlier. So maybe just at the top to say, well, this is really just suggested guidelines to approach math, as in MDMC, financial management strategy and risk management, in the APC exam. And so, so this from a math perspective, but irrespective of what subject you're dealing with, when it comes to competence, as Rendani rightfully pointed out, the golden rule is that you have to identify, or you have to cover all aspects of a task. And then within each aspect of a task, you've got to get to the crux of each aspect. So basically, that's the golden rule. So if you can do that for every task, you're pretty much going to be competent in every task. The question then is, how do we work towards getting there? And I mean, we can never guarantee competence, but we hope that some of the tips that has already been shared and some of what's in this guideline will move you closer towards getting to competence. Okay, so before we get into some of the guidelines, let's just take a step back on the big picture of math. Okay, so when I say math, I mean costing, finance, and strategy. So first thing to understand that every single thing you've studied in math, ever since most of us started studying math in our second year of studies undergrad up until we passed ITC, right? So the first thing to remember is that everything that you've studied in math are simply tools that helps to assist management with problem solving and decision making. Okay, so they're all tools, right? So therefore, it's just like when I need to knock in a nail into a cupboard or something, I need to know which tool I need to use, right? So I first need to know what the problem or decision is. And when I know what that problem is, decision is, I know, okay, I need a hammer, right? And likewise, you have to know what the problem or decision is, and then you know which math topic, which you've studied from second all the way to CTA, is going to be applicable. And so that's the second thing. The key is to identify the problems and decisions in the pre-release. Okay, and I'll touch on it earlier, but later. But the pre-release is 5 days, right? So you have a little bit more time. So I almost want to say the key is to identify all the problems and decisions, because what you don't want, obviously, is to miss a trigger. Okay, so that's the second important thing. And then the third thing to keep in mind is that management is responsible to implement the strategic objectives of the company. Okay, so what that means is that strategy, in essence, overlays any problem or decision that management needs to solve and make. And why that's important in the context of the APC is that you need to know that strategy, risk management tools are always important, irrespective of the problem or decision. Okay, always, right? So which means, and especially important is because strategy does not need to be triggered. So in other words, you gotta always be ready for strategy because it doesn't have to be triggered in the pre-release. Okay, so those are the three. Big picture, MAP is about problem solving and decision making. Second is it's about identifying the problems and decisions in the pre-release. And then the third thing to remember is when it comes to strategy, it's the overarching thing that you always got to keep in mind. So the rest of this document, we've tried to split it up to say, okay, let's start with what do I do in the pre-release period, okay, to prepare for MAF, and then we're going to talk about what do we do in the IOD. Obviously, we don't know what's coming, but yeah, hopefully some of the guidelines will help. Okay, first thing I want to say up front, because I've had a few consults, and I know some of you are stressing, rightfully. I mean, it's the biggest exam of your life coming up. But the first thing I want to say up front, there's absolutely no need to study the entire syllabus again. Firstly, you don't have the time to study the whole syllabus again, so there's no need to study the whole syllabus, okay? But the important thing is you need to pick up the triggers. So you only study or revisit what is triggered. You're not going to study everything again for the sake of studying, okay? Unless you're bored, and even then I still wouldn't do it. Okay, so the important thing is to identify the triggers. Okay, so below is a suggested approach. And again, I'm not saying this is foolproof, so it's just a suggestion. So below is a suggested approach about what to do in the pre-release period. Okay, and I've split it up between math or costing and finance, and then what to do in terms of strategy, okay, in the pre-release period. Okay, so step one is you got to identify, and you see I've made here all the problems and decisions, okay, in the pre-release documents. So from email 1 to email whatever, right? You got to all the problems and decisions. Okay, so, and maybe I'm going too elementary, but I even try to like break down what is a problem. So a problem is something that is going wrong or they're currently concerned about, right? That management is currently. So anything like that is possibly a problem, okay? Something that's going wrong. And what's a decision? What probably things they're considering doing. So I'm just listing some examples: investing in a machine, buying a company, entering a new market, introducing a new, those are all decisions. Just examples, but just to kind of like distinguish a problem from a decision. Okay, so that's the first important thing that must happen in the pre-release. Okay, and I want to say that I didn't write it there, but I want to say this also. That's not something that just you alone do. That means the whole group must be on top of what the problem and decisions are. Yes, we know task gets allocated or preparation gets allocated, but you can't be in the dark about what the problems and decisions are. You must be on top of the problems and decisions. Okay, so then the next important thing, given that I've just said you don't have to study the whole syllabus, but what's important is you then got to link all the problems to all the relevant math topics. And we're going to get back into this just now with the task D, but I think, you know, for those who have, you know, wrote the exam last year and maybe didn't get a competent grading for task D, I think this is where it fell flat. I think if everyone picked up that CVP was triggered, then they would have been fine, because I don't think the CVP actually was difficult. But I think a lot of people missed it. And when you miss CVP, I mean, it's as much as it's not a difficult topic, I mean, it's not fresh in your mind as an APC candidate. It's something you've done years ago. So I think this in step 2 is where I think it went wrong for most candidates. And yeah, you guys can comment in the chat if you agree about that. But yeah, so my sense was just a lot of people never picked up the CVP trigger. And it's also understandable why. So what we've done is, and it's just a stab at it, I mean, it's not foolproof. So we included an appendix here in this document. So I tried to fit it into one page. So here's an appendix with the entire math syllabus. Well, as I summarized it. So here on the left, we have the math topics, and here on the right, we have the possible triggers. So what we're hoping that what this will help you in the pre-release is to then go, okay, well, when I read this docs, it seems like they're talking about analyze the numbers. It seems like they're talking about, you know, this thing, and then I can link it back to the topic on the ref. Does that make sense to everyone? I see there was a hand. You guys could please stop me if I'm talking too fast. I have that habit of talking too fast. So basically, let me just backtrack. So what we're hoping then is that when you read that pre-release document with intent, some of you heard me say that before, is that you then go to the triggers. So let's say, for example, I'm using just the CVP of task D. I mean, on the day, I think in the pre-release, they spoke about please analyze the numbers, whatever. So analyzing numbers, you know, well, if I use that as a trigger, well, CVP is an analysis tool, firstly, so there, and then secondly, if I'm analyzing numbers, I probably need to know what a variable and a fixed cost is. I probably will need to revisit cost information and cost behavior. I probably also, you talk about analysis, I probably need to revisit financial statement analysis, all of those things. Yeah, we will definitely be sharing this document if you find it useful. I think it's already shared, but if it's not shared, we will share it definitely. Okay, so I'm not going to go into all the detail here. Basically, I'm just saying, basically where this is just trying to help is to get a sense of what are the possible triggers that triggers a math topic. Does that make sense? Okay, so if we go back to, where are we now? So that's step 2. So step 2 for you guys would hopefully then be, if it helps you, to go to the triggers on the right, which is here, and all the triggers, right? And then link it back to the topics on the left. Okay, and all the topics. And the reason why I'm emphasizing all, the chances are not every trigger is going to be assessed on the day. But you don't want to what you don't want is to have a trigger assessed that you didn't even pick up at all. So you rather want to cover your bases than miss a trigger. Okay. Okay, then number 3 is my suggestion is to refresh the triggers in basic detail. So what do I mean by basic detail? You're not going to go and do the most difficult example in your ITC notes. This is not the ITC, this is the APC, right? So you're going to refresh the trigger in most basic detail, and I would at least also practice a basic example. So just to give you an example, what I mean by basic. And so for example, if a trigger relates to an investment in a new machine, right? So if I go, let's just go here. So if I go to this document, that's the trigger. Investment in a new machine, that's most likely a long-term decision. Yeah, long-term decision, right? So if I look at that, that's going to be capital budgeting that I need to go and revisit. Okay. So then I go to my capital budgeting notes. And I go and refresh capital budgeting, right? And then I would also at least just practice a basic example on capital budgeting. Okay, so that's step 3. Then step 4 is what I'm saying is now that I've refreshed and I've practiced the basic example, again, just a suggestion is if it was me, I would document the basic steps on how to do that calculation. So if it was an NPV, for example, that's triggered. Now, this is just the basics that comes up here. So typically step 1 of an NPV is identify the initial outlay. You need to know for how long the project is for. You need to know if you're going to sell this initial thing at the end of the project. You need to know if there's incremental math profits. You need to know whether change in working capital is needed. Is there any opportunity costs? Is it the principally correct tax effects? So like tax on the profits, CGT, etc., and then you need to have a discount rate. Okay. Why is this vital? Classic APC, as we go further, we're going to check. Classic APC is to give you a calc that you need to critique. If you don't know these steps and they give you an NPV calc, it's going to be very difficult for you to critique it. Okay, but now you have these steps for every single trigger topic. It's very difficult for you not to come up with stuff to critique if they give you a calc. And even if they if they ask you to do a calc from scratch, like they did in task D, then it's also fine because then I just apply the steps to do the calc. Okay, any questions so far? Are you guys with me so far? Again, this is just a suggestion. I'm not saying it's foolproof, but I'm hoping some light bulbs are going off. Okay, awesome. Thanks for the comments in the chat. Okay, awesome. Cool. So that is for costing and math topic, costing and finance topics, right? So so yeah, pretty much anything to do with costing and finance. Rera Tilwe, I see your hand. You can go ahead. Okay. Maybe it was just a thumbs up. Okay, cool. So these are, like I said, all the costing topics and all the finance topics, right? And I mean, if you're not sure what I mean by that, you can just, yeah, that's in the appendix over here. Then how do we prepare? So that's preparing for costing and finance that may be coming. How do we prepare for strategy and qualitative discussion? Because that's the other thing. When I was a student, I hated discussion because I feel like I don't know what to say. And I mean, discussion often, you know, that they tell you often the markers or the feedback is it's not contextual, not relevant, and all of those things. And it has to be contextual, right? But often, even though you tell me that, I still struggled. Okay, so hopefully, what I'm going to try to share here is just like, how do you give yourself, like, how do you arm yourself with tools to try and become contextual? Okay, so so that's more. It's not. I'm not saying that you must just dump these stuff. It's more like be aware of those tools so that on the day you can be more contextual. Okay, cool. So if remember now we're talking pre-release, we're still in the pre-release, right? So we have this 5 days, right? And if I'm now preparing for strategy or discussion, if it was me, I would contextually summarize the following that's relevant to the company, right? So I would summarize what's the company's competitive advantage. Now, I don't have the time to, re-lecture all these things, but when we think of competitive advantage, companies are usually a cost leader like ShopRite or a differentiator like Woolies. All companies are focused on a narrow market, and they try and focus on a narrow market at low cost. Like a good example I always tell my students is Curves Gym. Curves is a gym just for ladies, so it's narrow, but it's not as expensive as Planet Fitness or Virgin Active. So therefore, it's a focused, low-cost market. And then you have the niche, which is like Lamborghini, Porsche. Only certain people can buy it, you know, and they don't care about cost. So just to get a sense of this company that's triggered in the pre-release, you know, what is their and it might be a mixture of these things, but like it's good to have a sense, because if, for example, on the day, let's say a company like ShopRite is triggered, which is low cost, right? And they're going to introduce vegan yogurt, and we all know healthy products are expensive. I would just question, hang on, ShopRite, vegan yogurt, low cost, doesn't make sense. Okay, so that's why having a sense of the competitive advantage is good. Then I think Rendani touched on this already, like I would also contextually summarize the Porter's 5 forces as it's applicable to this company. I would also contextually summarize the PESTEL that's as it's applicable to this company. Then also a SWOT analysis. And just always keep in mind that when it comes to SWOT, the S and the W means it's existing. You have a strength and you have a weakness, right? That's existing. Opportunity and threat is the future. Always use the example when I was at school and the bully told me that he's going to punch me after school. That was a threat. It's still coming. It's not, he didn't punch me yet. So just to remember, when we think of threats, it's still coming. Opportunities are still coming. Where strengths and weaknesses are already there. Okay, cool. So I'll contextually summarize that. And then also get a sense of the key risks that the company is facing. Just a reminder, a key risk is high likelihood and high impact. So something can't be a key risk if it doesn't satisfy both. So load shedding, we just saw just now, is a key risk. High chance of happening, has a high impact. But a tsunami in South Africa, high impact, but not a high chance of happening. So that's probably not a key risk. So just see if you can get a sense of what the key risk of that company is. And often, Psycho likes to do this, and some of you know it at Indonamo, we like to do this as well, that often we will give you a fictitious company, but it's based on a real company. And so maybe you will get a sense of what the real company is that Psycho is triggering, even though they're not going to use a real company. Then you can probably get the integrated report of that real company, and then you can get a sense of the key risks that real company is facing, which will probably be similar to the key risk of this fictitious company. Okay, then just you need to understand how to apply the 6 capitals. I'm not going to go into the detail here about 6 capitals. I think Rendani's done that already. And then also, then I just want to talk about the SAFE, or it's a SAFE model, but I call it the SAFE model, and some of you know why. So Rendani touched on this earlier, but the first thing when it comes to this, and it's the S in the SAFE model stands for, are the decisions that's being made suitable in light of the company's strategy, vision, values, goals, objectives, competitive advantage, and et cetera, et cetera. So pretty much everything that they end up telling you on that page 1 or email 1. Remember email 1, typical case study. Hey, so-and-so, welcome to the team. We're looking forward to you joining the team. Our company stands for this. We're thinking of doing this, blah, 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 blah. Those are all strategy, vision, values, etc. So in essence, everything they do must actually be in alignment with that. So when we question contextually, or we in terms of the decisions they make, one of the first things we can ask, like, let me just go and check email 1 or page 1 of this case study or the POI. Is the stuff in alignment with that? Does it make sense? Yeah. Cool. Yes, Katlefo, I see your hand. Or is that a hand or a thumbs up?
Oh, no, it's a hand.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Hi, Elton.
Hi there.
I've realized, like, with the past and UNAMO assessments, usually when we're given a strategy question, the proposed investment, it's always like not according to our strategic fit most of the times that I've picked up. In such a case, is it a point to mention that we are in the business of doing X and Y, but the proposed investment is it's not within our strategic fit? Correct. And how far should we stretch the fact that it's not a strategic fit with our current business model?
No, I mean, you just have to highlight the current business model is the following, and this seems to be outside of the business model for the following reasons. So that's it. You don't have to stretch it further.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. And I mean, it's the fact that you've picked up what the current strategic or direction is, and this is in contradiction to that, that already shows good thinking. Cool. Then the second part is the A. Are the decisions acceptable? Now here there's few layers. So acceptable in light of risk. So when it comes to risk, we can think of the key risks that may be applicable, the key threats. We can also think of the Porter's 5 forces. Like for example, when I say, why do I say that's a risk? Well, threat of a new entrant, that could be a risk. Substitute products, that could be a risk. Like if I contextually apply it well, okay, you get the idea, right? Pestle considerations, why is that a risk? Well, if the political environment is not great, economic factors is not great, is there technology I need to consider here? Okay, environment. So remember, it's contextually relevant. So I could rework those models into a risk. And then I add, this won't be on your document because while Rendani was talking, I added this around the if the decision relates to a contract, there's some other things you can question, like terms and conditions, renewal clauses, penalties, which are also possible risks you want to mitigate against. So I just added this afterwards, which I thought that is relevant to keep in your armor. Cool, so that's risk. Then return, is it acceptable in light of return? Well, basically, will it take money? Is it financially worth it? That's where things like possibly needing to do an NPV or things like that comes in to see if this is going to be financially viable. And then is it acceptable in light of all the stakeholders? So remember that emphasis on stakeholders, not just shareholders. So shareholders are stakeholders. So will the shareholders be happy? Will this thing we're doing, is it going to favor or be negative towards the employees? How will government view it? Society, etc. So, the lobbyists and all this thing, are they going to be happy with what we're doing? So can you see how this all of a sudden gives you a framework to come up with a lot to say? Well, I'm hoping you see that. And then the last part is, or second last part is the decision feasible? So do we have the financial resources to deliver? So capital structure, finance, do we have the funding, etc.? Do we have the human resources to deliver? Like just for those, in the normal case study, the pig farming, better pigs, those people had PhDs. Do we have enough PhDs? to do this thing? Do we have the expertise? Do we need to train our staff to operate this new machine, whatever? So that all falls under feasibility, but can we deliver on this? And then the last part, also, again, in the APC, you don't have to, ethics does not have to be triggered. So you always want to be aware of ethics. So the question then is just, that's why I made it the SAFE model, is ask yourself, are the decisions ethical? So ethical in terms of what your ethical model frameworks, and then possible impact on the reputation of the specific decision. Cool. See, there was a hand. Larry, I think, yeah, Larry, go ahead.
Elton?
Yes, Larry.
Evening, everyone. So Elton, I always get confused with the first two, actually, the suitability and your acceptability. So example, with the task that we just did, there was a brand management between the Roasters Coffee and Fodjan. So my question was that if there's that master franchise agreement, which brand do we kind of becomes a global brand between your Roasters Coffee and Fodjan with this agreement, you know? So where does that fall in between the S or the A, you know? Because I'm talking about visibility of the brand. We are in an agreement, but who are you going to put forward at the front as the brand for this agreement?
Oh, the visibility of the brand. Okay. So
of this partnership between the two.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a good question, Larry. I think maybe just firstly to start out with, this is just lenses. So you don't have to put. So in other words, this is just things to come up with things to say. So I don't think you must be so stressed about where do I fit it under, right? So what you're saying, like, who are we? Who's more visible? Is it going to be Fodjan or is it going to be Roasters? Like, that's a valid comment. And even if you can't fit it under here, it's fine, right? So don't be so concerned that it must fit under a certain heading. I'm just trying to give you guidance, like if you struggle to write stuff, hopefully this helps. But don't try and fit valid stuff under this. I don't know if that helps.
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Okay. There you go. Katlego?
Okay, Elton, I have two questions. The first one is that while attempting this type of questions, do we, while considering the proposed investment, do we consider how positively it will affect our business and the negative side, like both of them? And then the second question is that should we conclude on whether to continue this investment or not?
Yeah, I mean, maybe to answer your second question, the conclusion is always good. I mean, you never know when there's an indicator or something for conclusion. So I think that's always a good idea, especially if it's something you're considering, because you're in a sense offering your evaluation whether this should be accepted. Then in terms of the positives and negatives, I mean, yes, again, you would remember typically these would be under consideration. So considerations can be positive and negative. So there's a positive side to this. And then there's also obviously so as much as a lot of this is mentioned in the negative, there could be, so for example, we are starting a new company in this area where there's high unemployment. And so the positive there is that will align with government's imperative to
no. We want to understand the next.
Sorry, can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me now? Sorry, I'm muted.
Yes.
Yeah,
we
Okay,
can
okay,
hear
cool.
you. Yeah.
Cool, awesome. So what I want to say is that as much as a lot of this is maybe stated in the negative, you can also state it in the positive. So like opening up a new company in an area where there's high unemployment might align with government's impediment of decreasing unemployment. So that's in the positive. Does that make sense? I don't know if that answers your question. So you can articulate it as a positive or negative.
Okay, it makes sense. So there should be at least more negatives than positives to be safe in your discussion.
I wouldn't say that, but normally that tends to be the case. But I wouldn't say that you're aiming for more negatives and more positives. I would more say like this for me, this is how I would approach it. I get the task, the task seems to be about other considerations. I'm stuck. If you Alton doesn't come up with stuff to say naturally, so Alton will be like, okay, let me start at the top, suitable. Then I will just say, is it suitable? Right? So it could be positive. Yes, this is in line with our strategy because we want to do environment-friendly products, and this will be an environment-friendly thing we're doing. So that's a positive. Or it could have been, stated in the negative as well. Then I go to the A. It's like, okay, risks. Oh, you know what? This is risks in my file that I thought of that maybe I can articulate here. There's this Porter's 5 forces considerations that I thought of that maybe I can articulate here. Does it make sense? So I'm not aiming on getting more positives and negatives. I'm just running through this list to come up with relevant stuff to say.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. And then the E is just the ethical part. So just consider easy something that unethical. I always for myself is like, I think we need to not move away from. Obviously, there's the clear, code of professional conduct, which is outside of my jurisdiction. But there's obviously that to consider when you're a CA and all of those things. That's important. But then there's also just things that it doesn't sit well with you, like this thing that just seems dodgy. So that's more of an ethical and moral dilemmas that I would say that you need to be alert to in terms of the decision. And then obviously those things can have an impact on your reputation. Cool. So that would be in summary. I know we're going over time here, but that will be in summary in terms of if it was me, our advice in terms of preparing for a math task that may be coming or tasks that may be coming as it relates to costing or finance or strategy. Okay. Then on the day, okay, so on the day, obviously, it's very difficult to know what's going to come on the day. So this advice is pretty much just based on what we've seen typically happens on the day when it comes to math. So first thing and a lot of you would have heard us say this before, is you need to remember you have max 8 hours to finish the exam, right? So, and typically there's going to be 8 tasks, so which means per task you have max an hour, right? I do think when you think of what is needed for competence, I mean, you have to cover both aspects of the task and you want to get to the crux of each aspect. I do think that there's going to be a need to do some planning, but not more than 5 minutes. So I would say spend up to 5 minutes to plan. And in your planning, obviously, depending on what they ask you, but yeah, I'm just listing as an example. So if a task maybe has a critical review of a calculation and additional considerations, in your planning, I would say, okay, Alton, just keep in mind there's 2 aspects. And then maybe for the first aspect, I have this document in my file that relates to the scalp that I'm just going to remember about that documented steps. And then for the second aspect, like they're asking for qualitative consideration, okay, Alton, just remember the SAFE model that I'm going to contextually apply. That's planning done. I've in a sense, have an approach of the different aspects and how I plan to get to the crux of each aspect. Okay, then there is doing the task. So I say, yeah, up to 55 minutes because, that's, you only have an hour. You can't go beyond it. Because remember, competence is addressing all the aspects and covering the crux of each aspect. If you go over hour, you shoot the next task in the foot. Because for the next task, you're going to struggle to cover both aspects or whatever, however amount of aspects there are. So encouragement, just stick, don't go more than an hour. Okay, so this write-up over here just pretty much to say that, you probably now have 55 minutes. So if depending on whether it's the generic APC task of critical review of calc and other considerations, you then need to split this 55 minutes over those 2 aspects. And this is just a guideline, not a hard and fast rule. So please don't say, Alton, you told me this. And I'm just a guideline. Okay. So typically you maybe want to try a 60-40 split where maybe 35 minutes of that 55 minutes will be spent on the critical review and then the remaining time on the discussion. And why I think that planning is important, because remember, as Ndani pointed out earlier, and as I've said, if you don't cover each aspect of the task, you won't be a C, right? So it's pointless to spend an hour on the critical review and you never get to the second aspect, okay? So I would rather put a time limit for myself on each aspect, because if, for example, the critical review of calc, I get to like 35 minutes, I stop myself, chances are you've probably, assuming you've done everything else, before principally correct, you've probably got coverage and breadth already by the time 35 minutes is up. The more, if going further is not may not necessarily increase your grading, right? So rather than focus on doing the second aspect, giving that enough time so you can get to coverage of that second aspect as well. And so it's like this forceful thing of you got to stop yourself to say, okay, I'm now done because I need to get to the second aspect, and that's going to take a bit of planning and dividing of time. It's basically the APC's equivalent, I would think, of back in when you wrote ITC, where you times by 1.5 minutes a mark to give you a sense of how much time you were spending. I think obviously here there's more judgment, but I think hopefully this is going to be helpful. Okay, so now remember, we don't know what's coming on the day, so this is just a guideline. So this is just a suggested approach for a typical APC task in for math, which normally is around critically review a calc with an add-on of other considerations. So when it comes to the critical review of a calc, and you guys have heard us say this over and over before, but you got to follow a line-for-line approach. Okay, so every line of that calc that's given to you, then you want to, for each line, you're going to ask two questions or consider two things: the technical correctness of that line. Okay, and how do you know the technical correctness is on par? Well, hopefully you've picked up the trigger, and if we go all the way back here, hopefully you have the document with these steps for that calc. And if you have these steps, it's going to be so easy to pick up when something is technically incorrect. Brenda, I see your hand. Is it a hand or thumbs up? You can go ahead, Brenda. You're muted. Okay. I'll just continue. You can let me know if you have a question again. Okay, so so remember, that's for every line, you're going to consider the technical correctness, and you're going to use your documented steps, hopefully, to help you with that. And then the second part of it is also not just the technical correctness, but some of the lines that you're going to consider may have illogical inputs or assumptions. So you want to consider the logic of the inputs or the assumptions. And this is the part that assesses your critical thinking competence. And this is the part that's usually the big difference between APC and ITC. ITC is very much technical with a little bit of critical thinking competence, whereas APC, the critical thinking competence becomes a bigger layer. And it's very difficult to study critical thinking. The best advice I can give you is just to train yourself to pause and reflect. So when I go to the line, I pause and reflect on, okay, is this number logical? And some examples of how you could assess it is perhaps comparing to previous years for reasonability is like, hey, we've just come out of COVID. 20% growth doesn't sound great, doesn't sound logical to me. 12% growth in terms of economic indicators like inflation, etc., also doesn't sound like logical. So there's just some examples, and then also like linking to other parts of the case study that may be relevant. So I don't have a foolproof list for you. The only advice I can give you here is like just at least pause and reflect on whether there's this input here in this calc is logical. Okay, then so if you do that, so what I'm saying, if you follow the above approach, you shouldn't have an issue of getting coverage and depth. So in other words, if they ask you to critically review the calc, and for every line, you're considering the technical correctness and you're considering the logic of any assumptions that may be illogical, there shouldn't be a problem of you should never get the comment that there's not enough depth or coverage here, because you're doing it line for line. Okay, but bearing in mind, this is just one aspect of the task. I see there was a hand.
I'm sorry. Yes, hi, Elton. Just a question on just questioning the reasonability of things. Do we always have to connect it to like an external and internal factor? In your case, when you just mentioned that if you're if we looking at a number and like this doesn't seem reasonable, like the why of it, what do we normally, what can we attach it to? Are we attaching it to what's happening in the entity, to what's happening in the economy? Is there, I don't know, a set thing that we can compare it to, or at least attach it to?
Yeah, I mean, I can't, there's not a set thing. I think I'm just trying to give you examples here, but there's not a set. So, I mean, it all depends. I mean, if you're looking at a number that's in the future, so that's forecast numbers. So the question then is, how did you get to those forecast numbers, for example? And if the forecast number seems to be a lot higher than the past, so now I'm worried about growth. And like now I'm going to consider, well, what is the previous year's growth? What is economic indicators looking like for companies? Is it reasonable to achieve this growth and things like that? So that's just an example. So it really all depends on the context. I can't give you a foolproof list.
No, makes sense, makes sense. And then so now that you mentioned growth, then how do you reach depth when we're explaining growth? So when I say that in comparison to what was done last year, like this seems like a high jump, like increasing this by 20 million might just be, excessive. Is that enough to cover depth for me to say that increasing this by a certain amount based on prior years is, might be an issue?
Yeah, that would be now, because I mean, if you say it's increasing by 20%, and when you look at the past, the growth has always only been, single digit numbers, then that obviously seems out of line.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so that is the line for line approach on critically reviewing a calc. And then the other consideration, I think we spend a lot of time on this already, but this depends on the task. But all my advice here is, like, when you are stuck and you don't know what to say in terms of other consideration, firstly, you want to give yourself at least enough time to do this, because if you only have 5 minutes, you're going to struggle to get coverage. So that's the first thing. But second thing is, if you are stuck, SAFE is always a great starting point, and that's why I say it's good to practice how to contextually apply the SAFE model, because it is a great model. If you can milk it, man, to the nth degree, and somewhere in there you will come up with relevant stuff to say if you're contextually applying it. Okay. Then if SAFE is still not helping you, you still have time left, and you can try 6 capitals, you can try Porter's 5 forces, you can try PESTEL, you can try SWOT. I mean, I even tried in the SAFE model. But again, I think there was Larry asked the question earlier, this shouldn't be, it's more, if you intuitively can come up with relevant stuff to say without getting a crutch, then write those stuff. Don't try and, you have relevant stuff and now you're trying to fit it into a model, like, right? Because they're never going to say, I mean, I've never seen a task that says you must use this model. They're just going to ask considerations. So if you think of relevant considerations, write it down. Don't try and fit it into a model. All this is if you are stuck and you don't know what to say, which was normally my experience, then hopefully these models help you to generate stuff to say. Cool. So that's it. So I hope that you guys find it useful. And this document is very much a work in progress. Hopefully you maybe use it. You're like, hey, now that this has triggered something, maybe I want to, maybe make this document or approach a bit more for myself. So you're welcome to do that. So yeah, hopefully you found that useful. And yeah, hopefully I think it should be available already. Cool. Are they just, I need to get into task D. And I really don't want to finish later than 10 o'clock because I know it's graveyard shift. But any question? Itai, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, can you share this document, Alton?
Definitely. It's in the chat, they mentioned where it is found. I don't know if you guys have access to it.
Please.
It's under, try and find it in the chat, but it's under, there was a link to it.
Maybe the painted one.
Your classmates are saying it, other participants are saying it is shared, so under APC workshop materials. But I mean, I will, so here's if anyone feels they can't get it, just maybe let's take it offline. That's my email address, and I'll try and get it to you if you are stuck. Okay, cool, guys. Let's see. We got to get into task D. So yeah, so hopefully you know, with all of this shared, hopefully now the approach to task D will be easier. As I said, it's not about trying to rehash task D, it's the principles that we need to prepare for the next, for the upcoming Psycho APC. Okay, so I'm going to share, I can't share it in the box. I can't, it doesn't allow me to attach anything in the chat, sorry. Okay. So okay. Can you guys see my slides?
Hi, Elton.
Are they? Yes.
Yeah. Just before you proceed, kindly confirm for a review task, there is no use in mentioning the stuff that was done correctly. Is that right? Because I was thinking probably you're reviewing and then you state that this was done correctly. It's good as it is. And then you jump to the stuff that was done incorrectly. Just confirm there's no use. You don't gain any competence by mentioning the stuff that was done in the right way.
I don't want to say there's no use. I mean, critical review actually means good or bad, but normally what's the crux is the stuff that's wrong. So let me put it this way, if you stand back after you write down your critical review comments and you have more positives than negatives, you missed the crux. So I don't want to say ignore the stuff that's right, but normally the stuff that's the key stuff or the stuff that's wrong. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cool. All right, so task D, everyone. So I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at the reflection deck where we just looked at the PRI, but basically in terms of, and maybe I'm just going to quickly share that. The only thing that I want to share on that reflection before we get to the IOD. Yeah, let's just look at what was triggered in the pre-release. So you would have seen in the steps that I said in terms of how to approach the pre-release, or the suggested steps is we need to, step one is get the triggers, right? And so then we're going to link those triggers back to the math topics. So if we then just quickly summarize in terms of what was given to us on the day, they spoke to us about the acquisition of Big Ranch. So acquisition is the decision to acquire a company. So if you looked at that list of mine, if I go to the topic, that's probably valuations, right? Then they're talking about looking to improve profitability. So if I look at that, well, that's an analysis tool. So, I mean, in terms of, yeah, but there's a few analysis tools of which CPP is one. Then it says, makes sense to sell all restaurants. That was in the text in the pre-release. Again, the question, I'm just always skeptical if they tell me it makes sense. I'm like, does it really make sense? So just check, does it make sense? Is it true? Then they talk about this being a bargain. Again, how do I know that something is a bargain? Don't I need to value it first myself? So again, valuations. They talk about Big Ranch needing to pay normal fees from 2023. So, I mean, Big Ranch is in trouble. Now we're saying that in the future, they're going to have to pay the same as everyone else. If your goal is really to turn it around, maybe you want to consider letting them continue with a discounted fee. And then they talk about assist in discussions with franchisees. So that's thinking of factors which may be important for potential franchisees. So, and then they talk, lastly, there was a takeaway comment of, I needed to analyze the numbers. Again, I would then consider analysis tools. So if we just take this, okay, then, yeah, then there was a management accounts. Everything seemed like there was just drawings, which is a bit, just consider whether that's sustainable in the long term. Then there was an interest on the loan, which I would just ask the question, is that the operating expense? And then there's an interest in the lease liability. So lease liabilities has the capital and an interest portion. So what is operating, what is not? It's just a question. And a lot of that questions are maybe high level stuff. So I really don't want us to focus on HLAs. We just focus on what's the minimum to pass. Okay, cool. So quickly, just to summarize, and this is the crux around why it's important to pick up the triggers so that we can know what to refresh. If I then go to all of this Valuations was definitely triggered. So I know a lot of you were disappointed valuations were asked, but I just want to say that you weren't wrong for thinking valuations would be asked. Okay. Then also what is also triggered when we make a decision, we never make decisions just based on numbers alone. So therefore, your strategic qualitative decision-making models, like the SAFE model, is also always important because you're probably going to need to consider something other than just the numbers. And then because we were asked to analyze the numbers, I mean, CVP is important, cost information, financial statement analysis. I mean, the word analysis comes through. And then they talk about assisting buyers, assisting discussion with buyers. So that's pretty much around, we pretty much have to convince buyers or franchisees why this is a good idea for them. So it's strategic factors that we need to consider. Okay, so that's where I'm going to just leave the pre-release. And hopefully, if I can go back to this document. So hopefully, if you've done this correctly, step number 1 and step number 2, as well as number 3 and 4 here, you should be fine to pick up what is needed in terms of refreshing for what may be coming on the day. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. So let me go to what's happened on the day. So on the day, we get this email, and then basically saying Grace Khan had the potential buyer, and then she asked us to assist with. She wants to have an estimated break even on a sustainable basis. Okay, that was the first thing. And then for the purpose of your break even, assume that 60% of operating expenses are variable, and the employee costs in FY22 relate to the monthly cost of coming to salaries paid to restaurant staff and head office employees before any bonuses, of which none were awarded or paid in 2022. And then she also wanted to know how to basically what a cash operating profit break even for 7.5 million, and then she tells us how she defines cash operating profit. And then it says, please estimate what the break even revenue would have been in FY22 on a sustainable basis and the revenue amount needed to achieve the cash operating profit. Okay, then email this to me together with your key assumptions. Okay, so when we think of the big picture of competence, we got to cover all aspects of a task. And here it's clear that there are 2 aspects, right? And both aspects are pretty much calculations, okay? So the distinction between the 2 aspects was, the one is sustainable break-even calc with the explanation of key calc. So just a normal break-even, okay? And then the other one was a target cash operating break-even. So this is a break-even essentially to 0. And this one was a break-even for a certain number, but it was cash. So this second one had to be cash. So that's the 2 aspects of a task. Now, and this is where I'm saying where I think where this fell flat for a lot of people is that I don't think CVP is something that everyone picked up. And CVP is not difficult, but I do think I have appreciation for the fact that if you haven't done CVP in a while, and then on the day, all of a sudden, it's like, shucks, how does CVP works? You would have struggled. Whereas I think if you picked up the trigger, you probably would have gone and at least refreshed some of these basic principles of break evens. Like, okay, there's many ways to do break even, but like if you want to, the break even revenue, it's the total fixed cost over the contribution margin ratio. That's the one. And then also, if you want to do the full equation method, it's selling price times number of units minus variable cost times number of units minus total fixed cost equals 0. And then you pretty much solve for the unknown, which in this context was the revenue, which is selling price times units. Okay. Then in terms of target revenue, pretty much stays the same. Only difference is you add the target profit, and then you also solve for the unknown. So I think just on reflection, I know that for those who wrote last year, this was a painful thing to reflect on. But when you stand back, I hope that you see it's not because you don't know how to receive, you just missed the trigger. And hopefully this gives you more confidence that when you pick up a trigger and you're able to refresh the basic mechanics, that it's not going to be so challenging on the day. I'm hoping you see that. So that's why I don't want us to focus too much on the detail of CVP. I more want us to focus on have we picked up the trigger, okay? And make sure we pick up the trigger in future. Okay, Now, when we go into the detail as it relates to the task, I mean, the big crux of CVP is pretty much just variable and fixed costs. If you look at this formula, it's like you need to break it down to what is variable, what is fixed. So that was the big crux. So when we break that down, while food and beverages is arguably variable, or you could argue it was a mixed cost. Certain of it could be fixed and certain could be mixed. And then they clearly told us 60% of operating costs is variable. Then procurement fees, because it's based on a percentage of revenue, that has to be variable. And then franchise fees and marketing contribution were also based on a percentage. So those are probably all the variable costs. And then the fixed costs, employee costs. Whenever you're stuck and you don't know whether something is fixed and variable, ask yourself, will it change with the cost driver? Which in this case probably would be meals. So if the meals go up, clearly the employee costs won't go up. So clearly employee costs must be fixed. And then obviously the balance of the 60% or the 40% must have been also fixed. Cool, Ita, I see your hand is up. Okay, is it down? Okay, cool. Then the other thing, just in terms of the stance, because it was clearly asked, let's go back to this says the sustainable break even. So you had to consider things that were not sustainable. So the franchise fees, we were told we had to adjust from 5% to 3%. Okay, because the 3%. Yeah, sorry, franchise fees, I can't remember what that was, but we had to adjust that to 5% because that was going to be sustainable going forward, and marketing we had to adjust to 3%. Okay, because going forward that would have changed. And then drawings is probably not something we're going to do sustainably. That was just the owner at the time. And then joining fees, to include that is not, only a new franchisee is going to pay joining fees. Not everyone's going to pay joining fees. So it's largely sunk. You didn't need to say that, but just to pick up that it's not something that everyone's going to pay. So, okay. This was not just if you want to do our numbers, but I think in essence, if we look at competence, what was needed for this task, that's the grid. We can quickly go through the grid. Shumani is saying, oh, Palese is saying I'm still not seeing CVP. Okay, maybe I'll try and run through that trigger list to see. Kodisha, thanks. Yeah, hopefully the appendix will help next time. Okay, so if we run through the grid, the first indicator was correctly identifying which expenses were variable, and you didn't need to get all of it 100% correct, but definitely sufficient coverage of variable costs was important. Then identifying which were fixed, then adjusting the franchise fees and marketing fees, because that's about recognizing that going forward those were going to change. And then the fact that owners' drawings were irrelevant sustainably, and as well that joining fees is probably something that's not going to be sustainably paid. And then lastly was the principally correct estimation of. So it wasn't, you didn't have to get the exact same number of the solution, but there's a principally correct application of variable costs, fixed costs, and getting to the break-even revenue. Cool. I'm not going to go through the HLAs because I don't want us to spend too much time on HLAs. But if we reflect on what was needed for competence, remember you have to cover all aspects of the task. So you had to have attempted both calcs. If there was a good classification between variable and fixed costs, because that's quite key when it comes to CVP, and if you had a principally correct break-even calculation, and then if you address the sustainability part, so at least somewhere there was an adjustment to the marketing, recognizing that there was some joining costs or irrelevant drawings. If you've done that in combination, you probably would have been competent. So if we go like, if you, for example, didn't have sustainability, you probably were moving towards BC. If you didn't have a principally correct break-even calculation and you didn't pick up sustainability, you're probably now moving towards LC. So yeah. All right, I made it to 9:30. That's it from my, I don't know if there's any question. I see some hands, and let me just. Rachel first. Let me take your question or comment, Rachel.
Thank you, Alton. I just wanted to ask with regards to the interests, the two interests. So firstly, with regards to relevant costing principles when it comes to break-even calculation and not the cash one, is the principle that we include all types of costs, of fixed costs, right? So do we consider for the joining fees, for example, if the reason that stuff is sunk and committed and things like that, do we consider those principles? That's my first question. My second question is with regards to all fixed costs are included, including the depreciation and stuff. For the interest, would we still then ask ourselves which one is operational and which one is not? Which brings me back to that relevant cost.
Oh, I think
I don't know who muted me.
it wasn't me, I promise.
Which then would bring us back to that principle to say that interest is a finance related thing. Would we consider that in the break-even?
So it's a good question.
I did.
Yeah, so you'll see under the high-level indicators, it was exactly for that appreciation that interest can be financing. And so just that debate of whether we're going to take interest into account or not. So if you exclude it because you're debating like break-even is an operating concept, and therefore you're going to exclude it, that would have probably given you the HLA of the year. Or to say you're going to include it because you're doing an accounting profit, of which interest is still part of your income statement. But at least there was, I recognizing that a candidate understand that there's a tension when it comes to interest. Sometimes we include it, sometimes we don't. But if you just included it without the explanation, there was no credit, but also no, how can I say, negative marking. I don't know if that answers your question. And then depreciation. So clearly for the second calc, you couldn't include depreciation because depreciation was a cash operating profit. So depreciation should not have been there for the second calc. But the first calc, there's an argument that they just said break even. So you could have gone and you'll see that what I did here was, here was my calculation here to say that, I included depreciation because you are, I can assume it's just a normal accounting break even, so therefore I include it. Then I'm going to say, but when I do the cash operating profit break even, can you see under fixed cost there's no break even because by definition that's not cash. So I don't know if that answers your question, Rachel.
Well, it does to a certain extent, but because of the interest of time, I guess I will put down the consultation with you.
Awesome. But as I can see that you're rightfully picking up that tension and that's HLA. So that should not have caused you to not be competent if you debate. Like I would be more concerned if you missed the variable cost and like the other easier stuff, then I'll be more concerned. But that the interest and depreciation should not have caused you to be not competent, not in this task.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Larry?
Alton, just a comment on interest, just following up on Rachel's question. I think interest expense could have potentially been included as either fixed or variable, right? And maybe with an explanation because we don't know whether it's a fixed interest or it's a variable interest. But I'll leave you to clarify that. But the question for me is on the pre, there was that second line item, right, which doesn't have any note, which is called food beverages cost.
Mm-hmm.
Are we assuming that is all cash for the cash operating profit?
The second line, I think that's a reasonable assumption to make if you consider the restaurant industry, you pretty much have to pay once you leave. I guess there's this slight few days delay of customer swipes, and then you have to get that has to be converted, I guess, to your bank account. But I mean, normally a customer can't leave if they haven't paid for their food. So I think it's a safe assumption that all revenue is cash.
This is not for customers. I think it's for suppliers. The second point
sorry,
says food and beverage cost. So this will be the suppliers, of course. So normally, if you think about accounting, right? I know this is math, but you'll normally have the accrual because this is prepared according to IFRS standard. So you'll have this in an accrual basis, but there was no comment about that line item is one of the biggest or largest line item, right? So should I assume that it's all cash? Because if there are any accruals, I need to exclude them for the cash operating profit, if there are any accruals. Am I assuming that it's all cash here?
Yeah.
Without any.
I mean, there's too little information, so that's the only assumption you can make. And also, I would say, because we're looking at this over a year, normally at worst, you probably, from a cash perspective, 1 month behind, because your supplier might give you 30 days. So I think, when we're looking at it on a year basis, it's assuming that it's all cash is probably the best assumption to make in the absence of any other information.
Thank you, Alton.
Okay. Pleasure. Luyanda. Okay.
Hi, Doctor, and everyone. Doctor, like when I was attempting this question, I feel as if like I was under the dilemma, because like when I was checking the list, I was like, there are costs that are associated with lists, such as we have a right of use, like we have to account the depreciation and also the interest. So I'm not sure whether these people, they're owning properties, or as for the fact that we have a right of use, which means we are leasing. I don't know the plans going forward, whether like we are going to acquire a building or I was like, is it sustainable? I was confused as a result. Like when I was checking like the list, I think like there was something that didn't make sense. Like, yeah, like I feel as if it's a lease liability compared to a right of use. So I was confused.
No, I hear you. I think not to spend too much time on it, but like, so let me just ask you this question. When you consider that it's a CVP task and there's this possibility of worrying about lease liability and right of use and all, do you agree that that's complex? Because I mean, you said you were feeling uneasy, which I understand. So all that I'm trying to highlight is your concerns around right of use and all of those things that I would park in the realm of complexity. And if you grapple with that and kind of show why you're grappling with, you probably would, as much as yours D8 was the the HLA, we probably, if it's relevant to discuss, would have considered the HLA for that. So what I'm just trying to say is that, remember, we're trying to think what we do going forward. So going forward, when there's something that seems complex, it's most likely the HLA part of the task. So I wouldn't grapple too long on it, because I don't want to grapple too long on that and miss the primary indicators. Does that make sense? So I guess there was many ways you could see this lease liability. You could argue that it was a fixed cost. It's definitely not. I would definitely argue it's not variable. Could see it as a fixed cost. You could see it as it should be part of both calculations or only the one. So I guess there was arguments, well articulated both ways, but either way, that discussion in the context of this task is high level. So all I'm saying, all I want you guys to do for me, that you'll promise me, is that in your preparation for 1 December or 5 December, please don't spend too much time on harboring on the HLAs you've missed. Because that's, okay, will you promise me that? Because I will tell you now, as much as I'm a math lecturer now for 12 years, I probably will miss most of the HLAs as well. And I'm comfortable with that because it's the primary indicators that you need to get you through. Brenda, I see your hand. Are we good, everyone? I know I rushed through that task deep, but hopefully after the briefing on the approach to math, you hopefully are feeling more comfortable to prepare for the upcoming APC as it relates to math. I just want to say, as it relates to math, I did not say this is going to work for the other subjects as well. Leslie, I see your hand.
Hi, Elton. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so my question is with regards to the key assumptions. Was it enough for me to just write, for example, joining fees are sunk costs, then I move on to the next assumption, or depreciation irrelevant, or I was supposed to explain why I am saying joining fees are a sunk cost?
I think in the context of this task, you would have to say why it was sunk. Like, you know, not every franchisee or whatever is going to pay joining fees. So I think in the context, probably a bit more explanation here for sunk costs. For depreciation, to say irrelevant, it's only irrelevant here because it's only irrelevant for the second calculation because it's non-cash. And I think there you probably also had to just say that it's irrelevant because it's non-cash.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Courage. You can go ahead. Are you on mute, Courage?
Hi, Doctor.
Hi there.
Good. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, my question is on the approach on the day. So, yeah, there is always the adrenaline part that kicks in, and you obviously want to rush in a frantic race, like just to answer the questions at times before you step back and try to conceptualize what really is the problem of the day. At the same time, the time will be ticking. So how best do you manage that kind of an issue?
So I totally get that. I think the best advice I can give you is is that force yourself to do at least 3 minutes or so. I don't want to say a certain amount of time, but it's force yourself to do it at least some planning. So I think that's as much as you want to jump into it, do some planning. So that's why I said to put you at ease, you can probably go up to 5 minutes. But beyond that, then you're going to start to shoot yourself in the foot in terms of time. I don't know if that helps, Courage.
It really does. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. I'm going to take one more question, and then we're in the graveyard shift. One more question or comment, Jerindo.
Hi, everyone. It's not a question, but I wrote APC last year, December. I just wanted to warn other candidates that I was not really good at calculating the numbers. But because of the CVP, like you said, I didn't pick it up as a trigger, but I just kind of figure out how to get it out. But I managed to pick up the cost and all stuff, but my biggest problem was to put my comments in the Excel spreadsheet. So what happened is, I don't know, maybe it cuts off when the document print or something. So there was just hashtags like on the comments, not everything. Some of them, it was just hashtags. So I'm sure Saika couldn't help me, and all that hard work was just gone. Like, yeah. So warning, I think rather if you can put the comments in the Word document or on an attachment somehow, because if you can be like me, I actually ended up getting a BC on that task because I had some comments on the email and on the attachment. And then I thought it was easy for me just to calculate and put comments at the bottom, you know. So maybe my comment, like, I don't know, they said you mustn't write up over this line, or, you know, under exam pressure, it can be difficult to manage.
Yeah, Cherindo, I feel for you, but thank you for giving the candidates advice. Yeah, because that's true. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna call it an evening. Yeah, you are still welcome to reach out offline. But thank you for your attention, and all the best for the upcoming APC. We pray success for each and every one of you, and we're rooting for you. And yeah, we're trusting with you that it will be a success.
Thank you, Asim.
Cheers, everyone. Pleasure.
Thanks, Elton.
Thanks, Elton.
Thank you,
Doctor.
Doctor.
Thank you, Dogotela.